Consider this a hot take, but I think a lot of players worry more about the setup of lineups and less on why people create and use lineups in the first place. I've been using Fade for a while now, and her eye has a lot of possibilities. In fact, the clip that you just saw right here, because I positioned the eye farther away from where I was, specifically vertically higher than where I was, Raze had to either turn up and shoot it or shoot at me, realizing that I know where she's at. Now what you're seeing here is some 3 AM delusional, I'm trying to come up with lineups because I am like, this is the last game of the night for me. I am beyond tired. I have fallen into delusion and I am trying all these sophisticated setups that don't really bring any value whatsoever. And don't get me wrong, I don't think lineups are not valuable. I simply think that people don't realize why they exist in the first place. The thing about lineups, and why a lot of people say you should learn lineups, like if you play Sova, even Fade, Viper, Killjoy, Brimstone, odds are you should probably know a couple of lineups on a couple of maps. However, these lineups are used solely so that you have different options going into a match. For example, if I'm playing Sova and I know that I'm the last person on my team standing and I have 2 shock darts, if I know lineups for a default plant, I can delay them hopping on the defuse without exposing myself to a death. This can earn me 15-20 seconds, and with that time, not only do I prevent them from immediately hopping on the bomb, but also I give myself time to reposition, to position myself as best as possible, take 1v1s if it's a 1v3 or more, and ultimately set myself up to win, even though I'm by myself on the map. You see this all the time with Viper. Viper will go to a position that she has lineups from. Usually the player knows what the timing is for them to deploy their lineups, and it works out to where they might not even need to be on site, but because of the lineups that they have, it puts pressure on the enemy to push them because, hey, lineups are in play. If you don't push me fast enough, I will set this up and you will not be able to defuse. Or am I even doing lineups in the first place? It throws a lot of things into question. However, you can't always go back to the backup site and try to set up a lineup. That's not always going to be the case, and a lot of people fail to realize this. They have become almost too dependent on these lineups, and it can cost you the match if that's the only thing that you're focused on. You have to understand when lineups are good to use. You have to understand how lineups should be used. That's why if you know any of these, if you currently made any of these agents, for example, if you hop onto a match on Breeze and you happen to select Viper, odds are somebody's going to bring up a Viper, you know lineups? And that's because it's an expectation that a lot of people have. And don't get me wrong, you can still be really good with Viper with lineups, but you're ultimately doing yourself a slight bit of a disservice if you don't have lineups as an option. If you know lineups, but you don't want to use them all the time, that's fine. But you should at least know some lineups. It allows you, like I said, to set yourself up in better positions, gives you more time to work the clock, and ultimately, it sets you up in the long run. But this brings me to my last point, and that is that you don't have to be too technical with lineups. I think you hear about these pixel perfect lineups, you hear about these lineups from certain positions on the map, but ultimately realize that oftentimes it doesn't come down to a complicated lineup, it just comes down to knowing where you want your util to be positioned and figuring out how to get it there. A lot of these utility revolve around angles or with mollies, around having a good arch, and honestly you don't even need to know oh, I'm gonna throw this molly at approximately 87 degrees from the top of my map, yada yada yada. You don't have to get that technical. Hop on a custom match, go on the maps that you think you need to have lineups for or that you don't currently have for, and play around with some very simple setup. You don't need complicated stuff. I would encourage you to dive into some of the complicated lineups, but don't go right into that right away. I think a lot of people in the first place don't really want to figure out lineups because they think they need to know a pixel perfect complicated setup for a lineup that can do something that like does something pretty basic. But in reality, those lineups are just made because sometimes you might need a complicated lineup to save you because you're not able to use a basic simple setup lineup. Or those complicated lineups oftentimes have a lot to do with timing. If you know that the enemy isn't near to the site yet, the complicated lineup might take 30 seconds to set up, whereas the simple one is just a 5-second get them off of the spike type of lineup. So in those cases, you're working around different timings, and that's why these people have created all these different lineups. But again, I think you need to have a balance. Don't be a complete lineup Andy where you depend on your lineups, because you will cost your team a couple of rounds if, while they're trying to hold the site, knowing that you have somebody in front of you and somebody flanking you from behind, you're just trying to get to the lineup spot that you have come up with because, hey, I have lineups, don't let me die. But at the same time, you're pushing enemies because they're coming from your flank, and you get the point. Don't be a lineup Andy, but also realize you don't need complicated lineups. Don't get discouraged. Try it out, experiment. Like I said, hop on a custom match. But I just think a lot of people focus too much on the technical aspects and even the setup of lineups and forget that the reason these lineups exist are to provide value to your team, especially when defending or attacking, to have good timing, to push enemies back, whether it's from the objective or from a certain position. So keep that in mind the next time that you're picking a main, or if you currently main somebody that has the potential of lineups. Take some time, figure that out, hop on a custom match. You got this.